Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Friday Reads of sorts. Because this week I want to talk about all the translated work that I read in August. I told you beginning of August that I will talk about the books while I'm reading them, but that I will not wrap them up in a Friday Reads, but make a separate video of all the translated work that I read. Also because some people, are especially interested in translated fiction, so they have it all in one video. Other people, I don't know why, but there are people who just are not interested when I talk about translated fiction, so you can just skip this video. But anyway, so this is all the translated fiction that I read in August. Of course, August was Women in Translation Month, so that was the main reason why I read so much translated fiction. I mean, I try to read at least one or two works of translated fiction each month, but in August, it's of course, you try to read more. So I have a stack of 7 that I read. And also, I want to tell you, in case you are interested, I did indeed successfully finish my August challenge, my own August challenge, 30 books in 30 days. So I did read 30 books in 30 days, and I didn't even need the cheat day, the 31st of August. I actually finished on the 30th. So I'm mighty proud of myself. And I made a video about ticks and trips, yeah. Tricks and tips for the 30 in 30 challenge. And one of the things that I said is that I collect shorter books over the course of the year, and then I fit them in August, because that is one way of, for me at least, for reading 30 books. And I will make a separate video about the short books on Sunday. So there you go. But now, translated fiction. So the first book that I read, and that also, by the way, qualifies as a short book because it's just over 100 pages, is Territory of Light by Yuko Tsushima, translated from the Japanese by Geraldine Harcourt. The English translation was published in 2018, and that is 40 years after the Japanese original came out in 1978, if my math is correct. I really enjoyed this one. It was a try buddy read with Kim from Middle of the Book Match, and she just didn't like it, so she abandoned the book. And I can understand that, because it's, the language is, in particular, I think either you feel engaged with that type of language or you don't. You just find it weird or clunky, or so you have to probably best to try it out. But anyway, so this is the story, and I should start with the writer, Tsushima. She died in 2016. She was one of the most prominent Japanese contemporary writers. I read a previous book by her which I really liked. That's why I picked this one up. And this is set in the 1970s, and we follow a woman who has recently been left by her husband and who now lives alone with her 2-year-old daughter, and we follow her over the course of 1 year in short sort of fragments of her life. And given the fact, again, that this was published in the 70s, I feel that it's not outdated from, the feeling of abandonment, but also you have to reinvent your life kind of feeling, the struggle to combine being a parent with working, living alone. So I really enjoyed it. But again, I can understand that the language in particular might not be for everyone. So give it a try, maybe download a sample. And if you feel like I do, that this is kind of magical almost in the language, then you should definitely read it. The next translated work of fiction I read was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, translated from the Arabic by Elizabeth Jacquet, and the Arab original was published in 2017, and the translation in 2020 last year. Also, no, this way, also quite a thin book, 112 pages, so again, a shorter book. But this one is not, I wouldn't qualify as a very fast read because of the topic. So Adania Shibli was born in 1974. She's a Palestinian writer. She writes political quote-unquote fiction. I have never read her. I came across this one because it was longlisted or shortlisted for the Booker International, I think, something like that. So, and it was Women in Translation Month. There's also always a readathon, and this was organized by Kendra Winchester and others, and this was the group read. So there were various reasons why I picked up this book. The book is divided into two parts. The first part is set in 1949, and the second part is set more or less in the present day. So years and years and years later. Now, 1949, during the war, and there is one incident that happened. A crime committed. Don't want to give too many spoilers, but a crime committed by an Israeli soldier. And it's quite hard to read, I have to say. It's very well written. I guess the translation is really good. I can't really judge it because I can't read the Arabic, but it's a powerful language. And then many years, decades later, a young journalist starts to read about this minor detail, this minor incident, and starts to investigate. And then we follow her and her life as a Palestinian and what that means. She wants to travel, and that's difficult. And, it's not at all a cheerful read. It's harrowing and heart-wrenching, but definitely worth it. So I can highly recommend this one, Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, if you haven't read it. The next translated work of fiction that I finished was a book that I felt I was the only person on the planet who hadn't read it yet. Turned out not to be true. When I hauled the book, a lot of you said, well, I haven't read it yet either. And that was Disoriental by Négar Djavardi, translated from the French by our very own Tina Kover. The English translation came out in 2018 and the French original in 2016. Négar Djavardi lives in France, writes in French, but was born in Iran and fled when she was in her early teens, 12, 13, like that, with her family. So the book is highly autobiographical because the main character, Kimia, is also an Iranian refugee who now lives in France, and father, mother, and a sister. The book opens when Kimia has been living in France for quite a while. She's now in her 30s or something, and we meet her in the waiting room of a fertility clinic because she wants to get pregnant. And then from that moment in time, she looks back at her childhood in Iran, her highly political parents, her father, who is the marriage of her parents, how they met, and the father is a scholar, and like I said, both parents are very political. We have a lot of uncles, they are all numbered, who we meet and we learn about their lives, and we also learn about the political situation in Iran before Kimia flees. So it's a combination of the story, the coming of age, and more importantly, also coming into her sexuality of a young girl, later woman, but also the family history and the history of a country. And I felt that for the most part, this combination was done really successfully. I learned a lot about Iran, but it was also a very engaging story to read about this young woman. It was a debut, or it is a debut, and there were a couple of things that I felt plot-wise and storytelling-wise were less successful, where I felt that the fiction just didn't make sense. It was probably very close to the real life, but unlike real life, fiction has to make sense to a reader. So, but for a debut, I still felt it was a very, very good book, and I enjoyed reading it. It was also a buddy read with Kim from Middle of the Book March, and this one was more successful because we both really enjoyed it. The next book I read was this one, The Bitch, by Pilar Quintana. And thank you again for the viewer who speaks Spanish or is from South America. I don't know, because I said Quintana the first time I introduced this book, but that's not the right pronunciation. It's Quintana. So thank you very much. Anyway, this book is translated from the Spanish by, I have to look that up, Lisa Dillman. It was published last year in the English translation and 2 years before in the Spanish original. The author is from Colombia, and the book is also set in Colombia. And again, this more or less qualifies as one of the shorter books. It's over 150 pages, 165, but still it's quite a short book. I picked this book also for another challenge that I'm doing, and that is the Reading Women Challenge. You are all familiar, of course, with the Reading Women, and they have a challenge each year with 24 prompts, and one of the prompts was read a book by a South American author in translation, hence Colombia. This book, it's hard for me to recommend because it's quite violent, especially towards animals. So if you feel, like you can't stand that, if you have a dog and you don't want to read about people being cruel and violent towards animals, you certainly shouldn't read this. It's the book centers around a couple. And they have no children, and the wife at some point when the book opens adopts a puppy, a female puppy. And then, we learn the relationship between the dog and the woman. The husband also has dogs, but more as guard dogs. So we also see the various different ways that the husband and the wife treat their dogs. It centers all around this relationship. And it's quite harrowing, I would say. I thought it was a good book, but it was not quite what I expected in a way, which is not the book's fault, but my fault. I had a discussion with a viewer at one point, a couple of weeks back, how much our expectations influence our reading. But like I said, it was interesting to read, but it was also difficult because of the cruelty that I personally wasn't expecting. So if you can handle that, and if you're interested to read something by a contemporary Colombian author, then I can certainly recommend it. The next two books that I want to talk to you about that I read, both of them I have to thank Sean from Sean the Book Maniac, because he featured both books on his channel, and as I watched the videos, I thought, well, this sounds interesting, and I read both books. And the first one is this one, Learning to Talk to Plants by Marta Oriols, translated from the Catalan by, Mara Fay Lethem. Yes, and the book was published in the English translation in 2020 and in the original Catalan in 2018. And I had never heard of this author, Marta Oriols, who has written other books. She lives in Barcelona. She was born in 1975. I learned all that when I bought this one. And I will certainly check out her other work, see whether there's other books translated into English, because I really liked this one. I thought it was a good book. We follow a woman, Paula, who had a long-term relationship with Mauro. And the book opens when Mauro, after they had lunch, he went off in the street and he was killed in a car accident. So the book is about grief. Paula trying to deal with the fact that her long-term partner died, but there is a twist to this grief, because as we learn really early on in the book, during that lunch, Morrow told Paula that he was going to leave her, that he had an affair with another woman, that he's in love with that woman who is significantly younger, in her late 20s, because Paula is in her early 40s or something. So that's what the lunch was about. And then Morrow gets killed. So the grief has a twisted quality, because most people in Paula's family, and also Mauro's family, they don't know about that. Very few people knew that Mauro was about to leave Paula. And then, you get this this idea of how to deal with that twisted grief and come to terms with the fact that not only your partner died, but that he would have left you. It's sort of a double whammy that Paula has to deal with. And the sort of metaphor that is present throughout the book, even though it's not as prominent as the title might suggest, is Mauro was really into keeping plants and they are all slowly dying. But like I said, that is not a very prominent feature in the book. I don't know why the title would suggest that. It's, by the way, an exact translation of the original Catalan title. But anyway, so don't expect that this is a book about plants like I did, because it isn't. It is a book about Paula's grief and how to deal with it, and how she tries to manage to come to terms with what happens. But I thought the writing was good, the storytelling was good, and despite the fact that it hadn't as many plant issues as I expected, I thought it was a really good book. And the second book that I read because of a recommendation or video that Sean made, he didn't recommend it to me specifically, but he made a video about the book, and that is Yenta Mash, On the Landing, translated from the Yiddish by Alan Cassidy and published in the original in 2018 and in the English translation in 2019. I don't have a physical copy, so I have a picture of the cover put up here. Yenta Mash was a Jewish writer. She wrote in Yiddish, obviously, otherwise it wouldn't have been translated from the Yiddish. And she started writing late in her 50s. She was born in Bessarabia, which is a sort of sliver of land that was Romanian. And then in 1940, during World War II, it was occupied and annexed by Russia, by the Soviet Union. And today, it's in modern day, it's in Moldavia. So she was living there with her family, and during World War II, a lot of Jewish people were arrested by the Soviet Union, also in that part of the Soviet Union, and being forced to Siberia for, with very flimsy, there's no reason to put anybody in Siberia, but you know what I mean. And Yenta Mash, was able to flee, and then she lived in Russia for a while, if I remember correctly. And when she was in her 50s, she immigrated to Israel, and then she started to write. She died a couple of years ago, and this one, On the Landing, is a short story collection, 16 stories about the Jewish life, and centering a lot of the stories center around women's life, and all the Jews come from Bessarabia. Either there are some stories dealing with the deportation to Siberia, with the incredibly harsh life that they had to endure in Siberia, but there are also stories of Jewish people who came from Bessarabia to Israel later after the Second World War, and how they tried to make a life there. So it's about the diversity of the Jewish community in Israel, but also about this particular Jewish community coming from Bessarabia. So most of the stories are quite autobiographical, and I read this together with Heidi, by the way, from my reading life, who already put up a review, I think. So I will leave a link to her channel down below. You can check out her review as well. But we both really, really enjoyed it. There were a couple of stories that did not 100% work for me, but that's for me not anything unusual in a short story collection with 16 stories. I felt that some of the stories were actually more kind of personal essays than short stories, but still the variety of lives that we get to encounter in the collection, thought it was really worthwhile, and you can also have a look at the translator, because Sean had an interview with Alan Cassidy, and that is available also on his channel, and I will leave a link to this interview down below. It's fantastic. So if you're interested in this type of short story collection, with the red thread as the Jewish community from a certain area, I can certainly recommend this book. Yeah, and the last one, finally, because this is really a long video. I normally don't make videos longer than 20 minutes, but I wanted to put all the translated books in one video, so I hope you bear with me. The last one is this one, The Women I Think About at Night, Traveling the Paths of My Heroes by Mia Kankimäki, translated from the Finnish by Douglas Robinson. Also published 2 years back, 2019, and the original Finnish in 2018. And this was another buddy read with Heidi from my reading life. And I want to first of all say that I realized when I started to read this book, but also looking back at my translated books in August, that you really have to look for translated works of nonfiction written by women, especially. So that is going to be one of Heidi and I embarked on this project, that we want to try to read a more translated nonfiction written by women. So Mia Kankimäki is a Finnish author. She worked in publishing, and in her early 40s, she quit her job, and then she traveled to Japan and wrote a book about a Japanese princess who lived some 100 years ago. This is her second book, and it's a combination of a travel log, because there's a lot of traveling in this book, but it also features 10 or so women that Mia Kankimäki thought about at night, because they did something in the 1800s or in the earliest 20th century that was unusual for women at that time. And in most cases, for most women, it involved traveling. Being an explorer or traveling around the world, or like Karen Blixen, for instance, is one of the women featured, going to Africa and running a farm there. And because traveling is for the author such an important part of her life and what she is, she chose these women. And I thought the combination of a memoir, a travelogue, but also introducing me as a reader to these different women was just an absolute delight to read. Anyway, so I'm trying to finish this up before we hit 30 minutes. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.